The champagne flute trembles in my hand, a traitor to the calm I'm desperately trying to project. On stage, bathed in the saccharine glow of 1,000 spotlights, Vivian Laurent, my former best friend, my business partner, my betrayer, steps forward. Her smile is a masterpiece of practiced humility, the kind that wins hearts and fortunes. The announcer's voice, still echoing in the opulent hall of Paris Fashion Week, fades into a dull roar in my ears. Designer of the Year, my award for my designs. Vivian begins to speak, her voice like honeyed poison, thanking the committee, her team, her muse. My stomach clenches. I watch in a detached sort of horror, a spectator to my own life's carjacking. Each word she utters is a tiny, sharp stone, pelting my already bruised spirit. The elegant crowd hangs on her every syllable, their faces a blur of admiration and envy. They don't know. They don't know the designs she's being lauded for were sketched on napkins in a cramped studio apartment, fueled by lukewarm coffee and dreams she meticulously, systematically stole from me. A familiar scent, cloying and sweet, drifts past my nose. Vivian's signature perfume, L'Etoile Captive. Captive star, how fitting. The fragrance is a key, unlocking a torrent of memories. Suddenly, I'm not in this gilded Parisian hall anymore. I'm back in our tiny shared space, the air thick with the promise of what we were going to build together, before she decided together meant her on top, and me buried underneath. The scent chokes me, a perfumed noose tightening around my throat. I can almost feel the cheap, scratchy fabric of my old thrift store coat, the one she always said made me look like a charity case. My fingers tighten around my phone, a sleek, cold anchor in the swirling chaos of my emotions. A quiet power, a forgotten ember of defiance, flickers within me. I raise the phone, almost imperceptibly, and press record. Her voice, smooth and triumphant, fills the microphone. If she's going to steal my life's work, the world will at least have an unedited recording of her lies. It's a small act, a digital whisper against a symphony of deceit, but it's mine. Above us, a colossal crystal chandelier casts a fractured, glittering light across the room. Its tinkling, almost musical sound, a delicate counterpoint to the heavy thud of my racing heartbeat, seems to mock the turmoil inside me. Each facet of crystal reflects a distorted image of the scene. Vivian, radiant and false. The audience, captivated and unknowing, and me, a ghost in the machine, watching my dreams play out in someone else's name. And I tremble, not from the slight chill in the air, but from a volatile cocktail of rage and despair. Panic, cold and sharp, claws at my chest, threatening to pull me under. Then, something shifts. A different kind underscore of coldness spreads through me, a steely resolve that pushes back the fear. I am not the naive girl she betrayed. Not anymore. I breathe in, slow and deliberate, the expensive air tasting like ashes in my mouth. I will not break, not here, not now. As Vivian basks in the applause, blowing kisses to the adoring crowd, my gaze drifts to a large screen beside the stage. It's displaying a slideshow, a visual accompaniment to her supposed genius. Close-ups of her designs, mood boards, inspiration. And then I see it, my breath catches. Amidst the curated images, flashed for a second but long enough to sear into my memory, is a portfolio. Her portfolio. Being photographed by a press photographer, its pages splayed open, and on those pages, unmistakable even from this distance, are my original sketches. My handwriting, my coffee stains, the raw, unfiltered evidence of her grand larceny, about to be immortalized by the press. My heart hammers against my ribs. This isn't just betrayal, this is war. 6 months earlier, the world felt smaller, contained within the four walls of our cramped studio apartment in a less than glamorous part of the city. The air was a constant, comforting blend of the musty, exciting smell of vintage fabric, my obsession, and the sharp, clean scent of Vivian's expensive sketch paper. We were an odd pair, Vivian, always polished, her aesthetic sleek and modern, her ambition a palpable force field. And me, Maya, the girl who found beauty in discarded things, who could spend hours in dusty thrift stores, her fingers tracing the history in a faded silk lining or a forgotten button. My fashion sense, she'd often declared with a patronizing smile, was absolutely embarrassing. Maya, darling, she'd said one Tuesday, wrinkling her nose as I excitedly showed her a magnificent, if slightly tattered, velvet smoking jacket I'd unearthed. You have such talent, such an eye for detail, but this is costume, not couture. You'll never be taken seriously if you dress like you're rummaging through a theater's lost and found. Her words, as always, were a curious mix of backhanded compliment and outright dismissal. They stung, a familiar ache in my chest. My confidence, a fragile butterfly, would flutter and dip, but beneath the sting, a stubborn ember of determination always burned brighter. My embarrassing finds weren't just clothes, they were stories, textures, inspirations. They whispered secrets of forgotten eras, of craftsmanship that was becoming a lost art. And it was from these whispers that my designs were born. The scratch of my pencil on paper was the soundtrack to our evenings. I'd sit for hours, lost in a world of flowing lines and innovative silhouettes, transforming the essence of my vintage treasures into something new, something undeniably me. Vivian would watch sometimes, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. "You're brilliant, you know," she'd murmur, leaning over my shoulder. Her expensive perfume a stark contrast to the comforting scent of old wool and aged paper that clung to my workspace. But even then, a tiny, cautious voice in the back of my mind had urged prudence. Maybe it was the way her compliments always felt a little too saccharine, or the way her eyes lingered a little too long on my most promising sketches. So, I developed a habit. Before I ever laid out a finished design for her critique, before I explained the intricate dart or the unconventional drape, I'd take out my old phone and, in the quiet solitude of our tiny bathroom, or when she was out for one of her networking coffees, I'd secretly photograph everything. Every line, every note, every fabric swatch. A silent insurance policy I hoped I'd never need. One rainy afternoon, I was working on a particularly complex design, a dress inspired by a shattered stained glass window, using recycled silks I'd painstakingly dyed myself. Vivian was supposed to be meeting a potential fabric supplier. I'd been so engrossed I hadn't heard her return. I looked up from my sketchbook, a sudden unease prickling my skin, to see her standing in the doorway of our shared bedroom space. She wasn't looking at me, she was looking at my main design portfolio, which I'd carelessly left open on my work table. And in her hand, she held her phone, angled downwards, the distinct click of its camera shutter slicing through the quiet hum of the rain against the window. Our eyes met. A chill snaked down my spine, colder than the damp air seeping in from the ill-fitting window frame. She offered a tight, unconvincing smile. "Just capturing the genius, darling. For inspiration." But her eyes didn't match her smile. They held a glint of something calculating, something I was only beginning to understand. The unease that had settled in my gut that rainy afternoon grew into a gnawing dread over the following weeks. Vivian became more secretive, her networking coffees lasting longer, her phone calls hushed and evasive. Then, one crisp autumn day, my world tilted on its axis. I'd been heading to our usual cheap noodle bar for lunch when I saw her. She was stepping out of a sleek black car, the kind with tinted windows and a silent, powerful engine. With her were two men in sharply tailored suits, their faces radiating an aura of corporate power. And in Vivian's hands, clutched like a prize, was my portfolio. The one with the shattered stained glass dress, the origami-inspired jacket, the designs I'd poured my soul into. They were laughing. Vivian's voice bright and animated as she gestured towards a high-rise office building, the kind that housed the city's top fashion conglomerates. My feet felt rooted to the pavement. I watched, invisible, as they disappeared inside. The noodle soup I'd been craving turned to ash in my mouth. That evening, the confrontation was inevitable. The air in our tiny apartment crackled with a tension so thick I could barely breathe. "Who were those men, Vivian?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady despite the tremor in my hands. She feigned innocence, a perfect mask of surprise. "Just some industry contacts, Maya, exploring opportunities." "Opportunities with my designs?" The words were out before I could stop them, sharp and accusatory. Her composure wavered for a heartbeat, then solidified into something hard and dismissive. Our designs, darling, we're partners, remember? Partners? I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. When was the last time you sketched anything original, Vivian? When was the last time you stayed up all night with a needle and thread trying to bring an idea to life? The truth, stark and ugly, hung between us. She knew it. I knew it. Her face flushed, then paled. She walked over to my work table, where my latest sketches lay scattered, a collection inspired by the resilience of urban weeds pushing through concrete. With a sudden, vicious movement, she swept them to the floor. The sound of paper tearing, of my ideas being crumpled and destroyed, was like a physical blow. The bitter taste of betrayal filled my mouth, acrid and choking. "Don't be so naive, Maya," she hissed, her voice dripping with scorn. "You have talent, yes, but you have no ambition, no polish. You and your embarrassing charity shop aesthetic." She gestured around our cramped room, her lip curled. "No one would take you seriously anyway. I'm doing us a favor. I'm giving our work a platform." Her words were meant to crush me, to reinforce the narrative she'd been spinning for months, that I was the quirky, unmarketable talent, and she was the savvy, presentable face. But as she spoke, a cold fury washed over me, eclipsing the pain. "You think so?" I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "Professor Chen might disagree." A flicker of genuine fear crossed her face. Professor Chen, our old mentor from design school, was a legend in the industry, a man whose opinion carried immense weight. What Vivian didn't know was that after I'd seen her photographing my work, I'd started sending him weekly updates, digital copies of every design, every concept. My quiet power move, my lifeline. The fear in her eyes quickly turned to cold calculation. The next morning, Vivian was gone. She didn't just leave the apartment, she gutted our shared business. The small online boutique we'd painstakingly built, featuring my early designs, which she'd always insisted on modeling and taking credit for in photos, was wiped clean. Our joint business account, containing the modest profits we'd made, was empty. 2 days later, an eviction notice was taped to our door. The landlord, a paunchy man with a permanent scowl, wasn't interested in my story. He just wanted the rent. Vivian, my best friend, my partner, had not only stolen my dreams, she'd left me homeless and broke. The torn remnants of my sketches scattered on the floor like fallen leaves after a storm. The fluorescent lights of the 24-hour laundromat hummed a dreary, monotonous tune, the soundtrack to my new life. Rock Bottom had a distinct smell, a cocktail of stale bleach, damp fabric, and the faint, lingering scent of other people's lives. I was working 3 jobs, barista by day, laundromat attendant by night, and weekend dog walker for the privileged few in the nicer part of town. My cousin, bless her patient heart, had let me crash on her lumpy couch, a temporary reprieve from the streets. Sleep was a luxury, snatched in 2-hour increments between shifts, my dreams haunted by Vivian's triumphant smile and the rustle of stolen sketch paper, the eviction, the empty bank account, Vivian's complete disappearance. It had all been a swift, brutal education in the art of survival. The initial shock had given way to a gnawing despair, then a dull ache of resignation. For weeks, I just went through the motions, a ghost in my own life. The fire, the passion that had once burned so brightly felt extinguished, drowned by the sheer weight of her betrayal. But even in the suffocating darkness, a tiny ember can glow. Mine found its oxygen in the most unlikely of places, the lost and found bin at the laundromat. Discarded socks with no partners, faded t-shirts with forgotten band logos, scraps of fabric left behind in dryer lint traps. To anyone else, it was trash. To me, it was potential. During the long, dead hours of the night shift, when the only company was the rhythmic churn of the machines and the fluorescent buzz overhead, I started to sketch again. Tentatively at first on the back of discarded receipts, then with more confidence on stolen moments of paper. I began to collect the fabric scraps, a magpie hoarding tarnished treasures. My fingers, raw from endlessly folding strangers' clothes, yearned for the feel of a needle, the challenge of a seam. One particularly quiet night, I was draping a faded denim shirt, ripped and stained, onto a chipped mannequin I'd rescued from a dumpster behind a closing department store. I was twisting the fabric, pinning it into an asymmetric cascade, when the bell above the laundromat door jingled. I looked up, startled, expecting a late-night customer. Instead, a man stood there, his eyes, dark and intense, fixed on my makeshift creation. He was tall, lean, with a camera slung over his shoulder, his clothes artfully disheveled. He looked like he'd stepped out of one of the indie fashion magazines I used to pore over. "That's incredible," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate in the sterile air. He gestured towards the mannequin. "What you're doing with that, the lines, the deconstruction." I flushed, suddenly self-conscious. "Oh, this? It's nothing, just messing around." He stepped further into the laundromat, his gaze sweeping over my small, hidden corner, taking in the piles of salvaged fabric, the scattered sketches. "I'm Andre," he said, extending a hand. "Andre Dubois. I'm a photographer." "Maya," I mumbled, shaking his hand. His grip was firm, his eyes kind. There was an intensity about him, a genuine curiosity that was disarming. We talked for hours that night until the gray light of dawn began to seep through the grimy windows. I told him everything about Vivian, the stolen designs, the crushing weight of the betrayal. He listened patiently, his expression shifting from sympathy to a quiet anger on my behalf. He didn't offer platitudes or easy solutions. He just listened. And when I showed him my sketches, the new ones born from laundromat refuse, his eyes lit up. "This is raw talent, Maya," he said, his voice filled with a conviction that chipped away at the wall of cynicism I'd built around myself. "This is authentic. You have a voice. Don't let anyone silence it." Learning to trust again was a slow, painstaking process, like coaxing a frightened animal out of hiding. Andre didn't push. He simply showed up, sometimes with coffee, sometimes just to watch me work, offering quiet encouragement. His presence a steady, reassuring warmth in the cold landscape of my life. He started photographing my creations, the ones I stitched together from literal trash, finding a stark beauty in their imperfections. He saw not the embarrassing cast-offs Vivian had mocked, but the resilience, the innovation, the story woven into every salvaged thread. My confidence, battered and bruised, began to tentatively unfurl, like a plant reaching for a sliver of sunlight. One evening, as he was packing up his camera gear, he paused, a thoughtful expression on his face. "You know," he said, almost casually, "I know a few people involved in the more underground scene here. And I have a friend, a very good friend, who sometimes curates for the emerging designer showcase at Paris Fashion Week." He looked at me, a challenge in his eyes. "Ever thought about Paris, Maya?" Paris. The word hung in the air, shimmering with impossible dreams. The very place where Vivian was probably at that very moment, charming her way to the top with my stolen legacy. A bitter laugh escaped me. "Paris? Andre, look at me. I'm making dresses out of dryer lint." He smiled, a genuine, heart-lifting smile. "Exactly, and it's brilliant." The cliffhanger of his words wasn't a threat, but an invitation, a dare to dream again. Andre was true to his word. He became my guide into a world I never knew existed, the city's thriving underground fashion scene. It was a universe away from the glossy magazines and pretentious boutiques Vivian had aspired to. Here, in dimly lit warehouses, abandoned subway stations, and secret pop-up galleries, creativity exploded like fireworks. The pulsing bass of unseen DJs vibrated through the concrete floors, the air thick with anticipation and the scent of cheap wine and expensive ambition. The warmth of makeshift stage lights felt more real, more validating than any spotlight I could have imagined. My designs, born from the detritus of city life, discarded fabrics, reclaimed plastics, even shredded newspapers, found an unexpected home here. What Vivian had labeled trash, this audience saw as revolutionary. They understood the story I was telling, the narrative of transformation and resilience, woven into every stitch. My first show was a terrifying, exhilarating blur. I remember standing backstage, my heart hammering, watching as models, friends of Andre, streetcast artists, activists, stalked the makeshift runway in my creations. The applause, when it came, was a roar, a wave of acceptance that washed over me, healing something deep inside. I didn't have a marketing budget or a PR team. I had Andre's stunning photographs, which he posted religiously on his growing social media platforms, and I had my story. I started talking about my process, about finding beauty in the discarded, about sustainability not as a trend, but as a necessity. I embraced my embarrassing aesthetic, the one Vivian had so cruelly mocked, and it became my signature. I was authentically myself, raw and unfiltered, and people responded. My quiet power move wasn't about fighting Vivian directly, not yet. It was about building something new, something undeniably mine, from the ashes of what she'd destroyed. A buzz began to build online. Whispers of a mysterious new talent, the Phoenix designer who was turning trash into treasure, whose shows were more performance art than runway presentation. Bloggers wrote about me. Indie magazines requested interviews. I was still sleeping on my cousin's couch, still working shifts at the laundromat to buy materials, albeit slightly better scraps now, sourced from theater costume departments and fabric wholesalers' end-of-roll bins. But something was shifting. Hope, fragile but persistent, was taking root. One sweltering July afternoon, Andre burst into the laundromat, his face alight with excitement. "Maya, you won't believe this." He waved his phone triumphantly. "The applications for the New Horizons showcase at Paris Fashion Week? The one my friend helps curate? They close in 48 hours." Paris. Again. This time, it didn't feel like a cruel joke. It felt like a dare. A terrifying, audacious dare. "Andre, be realistic," I said, though my heart had started to pound. "It's Paris Fashion Week. They're looking for polish, not this." I gestured to the dress I was working on, made from intricately woven strips of old cassette tape. "They're looking for vision, Maya," he insisted, "and you have that in spades. We just need to get the application in. We'll pull an all-nighter, 2 all-nighters if we have to." His belief was infectious. For the next 47 hours, we worked in a frenzy. Andre photographed my best pieces. I wrote and rewrote my artist statement, trying to articulate the philosophy behind my work, the story of the Phoenix designer. My hands shook as I uploaded the final files mere minutes before the deadline. Exhausted but exhilarated, I collapsed onto the couch, a sliver of hope warring with a mountain of doubt. Later that week, as I was sorting through a pile of delicates at the laundromat, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number, an anonymous text message. "You think Vivian Laurent is original? Look deeper. She's a vulture. She didn't just steal from you." Below the message was a link to a hidden online forum, a place where disgruntled ex-interns and aspiring designers shared horror stories about industry exploitation. My blood ran cold. Vivian's plagiarism wasn't a one-time betrayal. It was a pattern. And I had just stumbled upon the breadcrumbs leading to her carefully constructed facade. The anonymous tip was a Pandora's box. The link led me down a rabbit hole of hushed accusations and bitter regrets, a shadow archive of Vivian Laurent's ascent. It turned out I wasn't her first victim, nor, I suspected, her last. She had built an empire, or at least the foundations of one, on a graveyard of stolen designs and broken dreams. Other young designers, interns mostly from various cities she'd briefly lived in before landing in ours, shared stories of striking similarity. A charming mentor figure who slowly, systematically co-opted their best work, then discarded them once their creativity was drained or their suspicions aroused. The musty smell of legal documents, photocopied in a dimly lit corner of the public library, and the incessant click of computer keys as I delved into old social media posts, archived fashion blogs, and forgotten online portfolios became my new obsession. Andre, ever supportive, helped me navigate the murky waters of online investigation, his photographer's eye for detail proving invaluable in spotting connections and inconsistencies in Vivian's carefully curated public history. My quiet power move this time was methodical, almost cold. I wasn't just looking for evidence against Vivian for my own sake anymore. I started reaching out discreetly to the names I found, the other voices silenced by her ambition. Some were too scared to talk, their confidence shattered, their careers derailed. But others, fueled by a simmering anger and a desperate need for validation, responded. We shared stories, compared sketches, pieced together the undeniable pattern of Vivian's exploitation and theft. It was a grim, heartbreaking tapestry. She'd stolen a signature print from one, a unique silhouette from another, a whole concept for a collection from a third. The emotional stakes ratcheted higher with each new revelation. This wasn't just about my stolen portfolio or the money she'd taken. This was about a systemic abuse of power, about the vulnerability of young artists in an industry that often valued ruthlessness over talent. I realized I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for all the other Mayas out there, the ones whose voices had been stifled, whose dreams had been plundered. The weight of that responsibility was immense, but it also fueled a new kind of resolve. The Phoenix designer wasn't just a moniker for my recycled creations. It was becoming a symbol of rising from the ashes of someone else's destruction. Then came the email that made my heart stop. It was from a design blog, a mainstream one, announcing the frontrunners for the upcoming Paris Fashion Week Awards. And there, at the top of the list for the prestigious Designer of the Year award, was Vivienne Laurent. Her name, a cruel brand seared into my memory, was being celebrated, lauded for her innovative vision and groundbreaking collections. My collections. The irony was a bitter pill. She was on the verge of receiving the industry's highest honor, built on a foundation of lies and stolen artistry. The clock was ticking, louder than ever. Paris wasn't just a dream anymore, it was a battlefield. And I was woefully, dangerously unprepared for the fight that was coming. Or so I thought. A week later, an official-looking email with the Paris Fashion Week letterhead landed in my inbox. My hands trembled so violently I could barely click it open. Dear Miss Chen, I still used my family name for official matters. We are delighted to inform you that your application for the New Horizons showcase has been accepted. I read it 3 times, the words blurring before my eyes. Accepted. I was going to Paris. Andre's connections, his unwavering belief, had somehow, miraculously, broken through the industry's formidable gates. Tears streamed down my face, tears of shock, of gratitude, of sheer terrifying excitement. Paris in autumn was a cliché, but a beautiful one. The air was crisp and carried the scent of roasting chestnuts and damp leaves. The echo of my worn-out boots on the ancient cobblestones sounded like a drumbeat leading me towards an unknown destiny. I was staying in a tiny, borrowed attic room, but it felt like a palace. My collection, meticulously stitched together from months of salvaging and creating, was titled Phoenix Rising. It was a tangible representation of my journey, discarded materials transformed into haute couture, beauty literally rising from the ashes. Each piece told a story of resilience, of finding worth in the worthless. The days leading up to my showcase were a blur of fittings, last-minute adjustments, and crippling anxiety. Vivienne was everywhere, her face on posters, her name whispered in reverent tones by industry insiders. She was the darling of Paris Fashion Week, the golden girl. And I was the nobody, the wild card entry with a collection made of trash. But I had a plan. My quiet power move this time was bolder, riskier. Through the network of designers Vivienne had wronged, I'd managed to get my hands on irrefutable proof of her plagiarism, dated sketches, original concept boards, even sworn affidavits from other victims. I compiled it all into a discreet digital file. And through a sympathetic journalist Andre knew, one who was tired of the industry's smoke and mirrors, I arranged for that file to find its way onto the private tablets of several key award judges, disguised as a supplementary portfolio from an anonymous source highlighting emerging design ethics. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble. The night of my show, the backstage area was a chaotic ballet of nervous energy and focused determination. Models rushed past, dressers darted between racks of clothes, and the air crackled with the pre-show jitters. I stood in a quiet corner taking deep breaths, trying to channel years of pain, frustration, and a burning desire for justice into my presentation. This wasn't just about clothes anymore. This was about reclaiming my narrative. As the first model stepped onto the runway, a hush fell over the audience. My designs, so unconventional, so raw, were unlike anything else being shown that week. The deconstructed denim, the woven cassette tape, the silks dyed with rust and tea. They weren't just garments, they were statements. Andre, positioned in the photographer's pit, gave me a thumbs up, his smile a beacon of reassurance. The show built to a crescendo, each piece more audacious, more innovative than the last. The final look, a magnificent gown crafted from thousands of tiny iridescent plastic shards, reclaimed from ocean waste, shimmered under the lights like a suit of armor for a warrior queen. As the model took her final turn, the applause started, hesitant at first, then swelling into a thunderous ovation. They got it. They understood. My Phoenix Rising collection had, against all odds, taken flight. I stepped out from my bow, blinking against the bright lights, my heart soaring. And then I saw her. Sitting in the front row, impeccably dressed, her face a mask of polite applause that couldn't quite conceal the pallor beneath her makeup. Vivian. Her eyes met mine across the runway, and in them, I saw not triumph, not arrogance, but a flicker of something I hadn't seen before. Recognition. And perhaps, just perhaps, a sliver of fear. The Phoenix had landed in Paris, and the game was far from over. The night of the awards ceremony arrived, heavy with anticipation and the cloying scent of expensive perfumes mingling in the air. The grand hall buzzed with the elite of the fashion world, a sea of silk, sequins, and carefully constructed smiles. I felt strangely calm, the weight of my handmade dress. A column of deep indigo fashioned from discarded velvet curtains, embroidered with reclaimed jet beads. A comforting presence. Andre was by my side, a grounding force in his impeccably tailored yet subtly subversive suit. I was an unexpected contender, the dark horse, the whisper that had grown into a murmur. My quiet power move for the evening was twofold. Tucked into my small beaded clutch were two speeches, neatly folded. One, gracious and humble, thanking the committee for the incredible honor of being nominated among such luminaries. The other was devastating. A carefully worded, fact-based chronicle of theft and deception, ready to be deployed if the universe, or rather the judges, tilted in a direction that demanded truth over politeness. The tension in the room was a palpable entity as the categories were announced. Names were called, polite applause followed, winners gushed their thanks. I watched, my expression neutral, my heart a steady drum against my ribs. Then came the award for Supporting Designer of the Year, and the award goes to Vivian Laurent. A wave of applause, louder this time, more enthusiastic. Vivian, looking radiant in a shimmering gold gown that I vaguely recognized as a bastardized version of one of my early sketches, glided onto the stage. Her acceptance speech was flawless, hitting all the right notes of surprise, gratitude, and humble ambition. She thanked her team, her non-existent mentor, and dedicated the award to all the young designers out there who dare to dream. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. She even had the audacity to give a small, almost condescending nod in my general direction, a smug smile playing on her lips, confident that the main award, the one that truly mattered, was already hers. My stomach churned, but I kept my composure, offering a small, tight smile. The room quieted again. The presenter, a legendary fashion editor with an air of regal disdain, stepped back to the microphone. And now, for the most anticipated award of the evening, the Designer of the Year. This year, the competition was exceptionally fierce, the innovation astounding. But one designer stood out, not just for their creativity, but for their courage, their authenticity, and their groundbreaking approach to sustainable couture. The Designer of the Year is... A dramatic pause, the air crackled. I could hear Andre's breathing beside me. Maya Chen! The name, my name, echoed through the hall. For a split second, there was stunned silence. Then, the room erupted. It wasn't just applause, it was a roar, a tidal wave of sound that washed over me, threatening to pull me under. Andre was hugging me, shouting something incoherent in my ear. I was vaguely aware of cameras flashing, of people turning in their seats to stare. Dimly, I saw Vivian's face. Her smile had frozen, then crumbled, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated shock, quickly morphing into something ugly and venomous. Somehow, I was on my feet, moving towards the stage, my legs feeling like they belonged to someone else. The weight of the moment, the years of struggle, the crushing betrayals, and the improbable triumph pressed down on me. I reached the podium, the lights blinding, the sea of faces a blur. I took a deep breath, my fingers closing around the neatly folded paper in my clutch. Not the gracious one, the other one. Thank you, I began, my voice surprisingly clear and steady, amplified by the microphone. Thank you to the esteemed judges, to Paris Fashion Week. This is an honor I never dared to imagine. I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the room, finally resting on Vivian. Tonight, we celebrate creativity, innovation, and the power of a unique voice. But true design, true artistry, is built on integrity. It is built on authenticity. I saw Vivian flinch. The room was utterly silent now, captivated. My collection, Phoenix Rising, is about transformation, about finding beauty in what others discard. It is also about reclaiming what was stolen. My voice didn't waver. For too long, the fashion industry has allowed powerful figures to exploit and silence emerging talent. Tonight, I want to dedicate this award not just to those who dare to dream, but to those who have had their dreams co-opted, their voices muted, their work plagiarized. I didn't need to name names. Every eye in the room, drawn by an invisible current, flickered towards Vivian. Her face was ashen. The carefully constructed composure had shattered, revealing the raw panic beneath. Authenticity, I continued, my voice ringing with a conviction I didn't know I possessed. It cannot be manufactured. It cannot be stolen. It can only be earned. I raised the award, the cool medal, a solid testament in my hand. And tonight I am deeply, profoundly grateful to be recognized for mine. The applause that followed was deafening, a validation that resonated deep in my soul. As I stepped away from the podium, I saw Vivian push back her chair, her face a mask of fury and humiliation. She turned and practically fled the hall, a flurry of gold fabric disappearing through a side exit. The photographers, sensing a story far bigger than a simple award win, swarmed around me, their flashes popping like a volley of fireworks, illuminating the start of a new, unexpected chapter. The aftermath was an explosion. My story, the Phoenix designer who called out a thief at Paris Fashion Week, went viral within hours. News outlets, fashion blogs, and social media platforms devoured the drama, the tale of betrayal and vindication, a potent cocktail for public consumption. The video of my acceptance speech, the one I'd so calmly delivered, was everywhere, dissected and debated, praised for its grace and its audacity. My phone buzzed relentlessly, a constant stream of notifications, interview requests, messages of support from strangers, and most hearteningly, tentative DMs from other designers sharing their own stories of exploitation, many of them involving Vivian. My quiet power move became louder now, amplified by my newfound platform. In every interview, I made it a point to not just talk about my designs or my journey, but to speak about the systemic issues in the fashion industry, the vulnerability of young talent, and the importance of protecting intellectual property. I elevated the stories of the other artists Vivian had wronged, connecting them with journalists and legal aid. What started as my personal battle became a collective call for transparency and accountability. The legal consequences for Vivian unfolded with a swiftness that surprised everyone. The evidence I'd planted, combined with the public outcry and the sudden courage of other victims stepping forward, was overwhelming. Lawsuits were filed, not just by me, but by at least 3 other designers whose work she had flagrantly stolen. Major fashion houses that had been courting her distanced themselves overnight. Endorsement deals vanished. Her carefully constructed empire, built on a foundation of lies, crumbled like a sandcastle against a rising tide. For me, the victory wasn't just in seeing Vivian fall, it was in the peace that settled over me, a profound sense of rightness. The bitterness that had clung to me for so long began to dissipate, replaced by a sense of purpose. Fashion houses, the very same ones that wouldn't have given embarrassing Maya Chen a second glance a year ago, were now bidding for my Phoenix Rising collection. Offers poured in for collaborations, for capsule lines, for creative directorships, but my biggest, most satisfying project was the one I started myself. The Phoenix Foundation, an organization dedicated to supporting emerging designers, offering legal advice, mentorship, and grants to those who, like me, were trying to navigate the treacherous waters of the fashion world with nothing but their talent and their integrity. It was my way of ensuring that other bright sparks wouldn't be so easily extinguished. Life became a whirlwind of activity, of designing, of building, of speaking out. I was still Maya, the girl who loved vintage fabrics and believed in the stories they told. But now, the world was finally listening. One evening, exhausted but exhilarated after a long day of meetings and fittings for my first commercial collection, I returned to my surprisingly chic Parisian hotel room, a definite upgrade from my cousin's couch. Just as I was about to collapse onto the plush bed, there was a soft, hesitant knock at the door. My heart gave a strange little lurch. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened the door and my breath caught in my throat. It was Vivian, but not the polished, imperious Vivian I knew. This Vivian was diminished. Her expensive clothes were rumpled, her usually impeccable makeup smudged, her eyes red-rimmed and hollow. The vibrant, predatory energy that had always surrounded her was gone, replaced by a weary desperation. The sound of rain lashing against the hotel window panes seemed to fill the sudden silence between us. "Maya," she began, her voice a mere tremor, a faint echo of its former confident timbre. Can I come in?" I hesitated for a moment, then stepped back, a strange sense of detachment washing over me. She shuffled past me into the room, looking small and out of place amidst the understated luxury. "What do you want, Vivian?" I asked, my voice devoid of the anger I might have expected to feel. It was just tired. She wrung her hands, her gaze fixed on the plush carpet. I I wanted to apologize. The words sounded foreign on her tongue. What I did to you, Maya, to everyone, it was unforgivable. She finally looked up, her eyes pleading. I lost everything. My reputation. My career. I deserve it, I know, but I'm so sorry. We stood there for a long moment, the only sound the persistent drumming of the rain. I thought of all the pain she'd caused, the dreams she'd crushed, the trust she'd shattered. Revenge would have been easy. A few scathing words, the satisfaction of seeing her grovel. But as I looked at her, I didn't feel hatred. I felt a strange sort of pity and a profound sense of my own growth. My quiet power move, the final one in this saga, wasn't about retribution. It was about transformation, hers and mine. I'm starting a new atelier, Vivian, I said, my voice calm. A big one. I need staff. People who understand the industry, who know how to get things done. People who are willing to work hard from the ground up. I paused. I need an assistant. It's not glamorous. The pay is terrible to start. And you'll answer to me, but it's a job. Her jaw dropped. She stared at me, speechless, a tumult of emotions warring on her face. Disbelief, shame, and then a tiny, flickering spark of something like hope. You'd do that? After everything? Everyone deserves a chance to rise from their own ashes, Vivian, I said softly. Even you. But this time, you build it honestly. She nodded, tears finally spilling over, tracing clean paths through the smudged makeup. 1 year later. The satisfied silence of my own design studio was my favorite sound. It was a vast, light-filled space, bustling with creative energy, filled with the scent of fresh fabrics and brewing coffee, not the musty odor of betrayal. My empire, Maya Chen Designs, was built on authenticity, on sustainable practices, and on a fierce commitment to supporting other artists. The Phoenix Foundation was thriving, helping dozens of young designers find their footing. Vivian, true to her word, had started at the bottom. She was a surprisingly efficient, if humbled, assistant. The old arrogance was gone, replaced by a quiet diligence. Whether she truly understood the depth of her past actions, I couldn't be sure, but she was working honestly for the first time in a long time. Tonight, I was attending another awards ceremony. This time, I was being honored for my work in ethical fashion. As I stood before my full-length mirror, adjusting the collar of my outfit, I smiled. I was wearing a stunning, intricately patched jacket made from dozens of embarrassing vintage silk scarves, each one telling a story, their combined beauty a testament to the power of reinvention. It was a piece Vivian would have once openly mocked. Now she'd probably just silently take notes on its construction. Some people call my fashion sense embarrassing. I call it revolutionary.